I'm gonna list 5 pathways. It really should be 3, but I'm going to say 5 because that's what I got here as I was listening this morning and thinking about it. And these are not what's important to entrepreneurs. This is where can the government have the largest value add. Okay, so we're very clear that we may have something that's very important to entrepreneurs, but there's really not much government can do about it, in which case you're not going to pick it. But I want you to pick one, and it's okay if everybody picks the same one, I don't care. One of these and say this is where government can really have significant value add, and research about that should be a priority for this World Bank study. The first is access to finance, don't need to elaborate on that. Access to customers. Your customer is your best investor, Esther Dyson, and Ann was talking about that earlier. Access to talent, so is it the sort of talent flow for the entrepreneur, not the entrepreneur that is himself, but basically to staff and grow the firm, access to talent. Access to networks and mentorship, this is number 4, access to networks and mentorship. And then this interesting one of access to visibility. Okay, access to visibility, and this could be prize programs, award programs, anything that's just simply a bulletin board, right? So you got finance, customers, talents, let's say mentorship / networks, a little bit different, but I'm going to put them in the same bin, and visibility. So starting with you, Steve, and moving on down.
So it has
you got to pick
be,
one.
It has to be one of those 5. It can't be none of the above.
It could be none of the above. I'm happy with none of the above. That's fine.
Yeah. The role of government, to me, is none of the above. The role of government is to create a regulatory environment, and I certainly agree with Sammy, that is enforced, that allows entrepreneurs to succeed. So these 5 things are not the things that I would look to government to do. It's rather the regulatory.
Great answer. That's fine. Okay. Yep.
Can I just say ditto?
Okay. Perfect.
No, I think, you know, I mean, these 5 things are important, but I think that the role of government really is more related to the answer to this question. And I don't have the answer, but I'm going to give you the question.
Yeah.
And the question is, are high-growth firms in developing countries, right, but in a particular subset of low-income countries, growing because they are able to exert political influence through family or other networks, and either circumvent or afford the cost of corruption? Or are they growing because they are the most competitive, best performing firms in that sector? And I don't know what the answer is to that question, but I think that is what the role of government should seek to sort of deal with and mitigate.
Well, I want to add a minute or two onto your allocated time for you to share what we were talking about. So we know that that Ann's data are very compelling. I mean, again, these are the firms that are actually successful. So when we look at the actually successful firms, she described, 75%. And Ann, I was going to call you on this, but I mean, you even qualify the he. So clearly it's a bunch of guys. It's a bunch of well-connected guys that got educated in the West, which is not cheap. So presumably then they already come from favored backgrounds, right? And then they're coming back with these connections, and these guys are building a lot of the high growth companies. And you had a sort of response and contextualization to that. So.
Sure, and that's great, but and I think there were others. So they have a mainstream university degree, graduate degree, and often engineer. Often engineering. And they go and work for a large MNC first, right? So we then take into context Erico's point about the number of formal versus informal entrepreneurs in a place like India, for example. The average person is not that guy, right? And so while that guy's great and maybe creating jobs, if you're talking about access to opportunities, you maybe want to think about a different kind of person who may need to get around regulatory barriers in order to start, grow, and export or do whatever it is that leads to that particular firm's growth. So my argument would be, that's a great number, and those are great people to encourage, but those are maybe not the people that government policy needs to focus on at this stage, because those people more than likely, I'm willing to bet, have more access to political influence and networks than the average person. And so those firms would be growing, but from a development perspective, I'm not sure that that's necessarily the growth you're targeting.
Right. Perfect. Okay, so we have 2 none of the aboves so far. Happy to run the table on none of the above. I think that's a terrific answer. But Wang, does any of these, do you feel like there's some sort of role here? I mean, Singapore has invested a lot in the access to finance side. there's an unfortunate linguistic thing because, they title these the business angel scheme, the early venture funding scheme. In the United States, the word scheme has kind of a pejorative context, so it doesn't seem like it's going to work out very well. But I know that, again, this is a linguistic issue. But I mean, out of those four, or do you say none of the above to those five?
Well, it really depends on which economy you're talking about. I mean, obviously, different economy, these five factors will be very different. I guess in the case of Singapore, to me, the biggest is really access to market, because Singapore is a very small domestic economy, and if you're talking about you're trying to nurture innovative entrepreneurs, the key is to have access to a customer who are willing to take risk with a relatively unproven technology, with relatively unproven companies. I mean, a lot of people talk about Silicon Valley as a very, all the venture capital, but actually the real secret success of Silicon Valley is that you have many large dynamic firms who are willing to buy from unproven new startup companies.
Right.
And at the same time, they are also a breeding ground for merger acquisitions.
Right.
And because having exit is also very important. And thirdly, they actually provided the talents and recycle them to the economy for the growth. If I start a company, I receive Series A investing. To grow to the next stage, I can hire someone who have done it before to join me.
Yeah.
So therefore, having those big companies that provide all these benefit to the ecosystem is very important. And in Singapore, unfortunately, until recently, we have subsidiary or multinational. If it's a Citibank, you try and sell the Citibank some new fintech software. They say that decision is made by the headquarters, not by us.
Right.
And we have therefore a challenge that, in our context, it will be the access to lead user customer.
And actually, there was a question that was left over from the last session that I promised to bring to this session. We haven't really integrated the issue of procurement as much, but in highlighting customers, I mean, if you did sort of indirectly reference it in terms of who has access to those contracts, but I think that, and there was a specific question about the history in the United States. I just want to reinforce this notion. There's a great paper by Stuart Leslie, I believe, on the government, or the government is the biggest angel, but it's about the early history of Silicon Valley and the very significant role of the government as a buyer. And certainly we know it's not just that DARPA built the internet, but they paid BBN as a private company to build the internet. And so that capacity of the government bought the internet initially. They didn't grant to fund the internet, they bought it. And so I mean, I think that this is actually a point from the previous panel that I personally just want to reinforce on this panel. I think what we've heard so far is consistent with that, and it's consistent with what you said.
Actually, I want to leverage off the point and say that actually there is an important sixth factor that you didn't mention, which is the access to infrastructures.
Infrastructure, okay.
Which you talk about internet. I mean, in China today, for example, you would arguably say that Alibaba has created a rural revolution in China. You have a small villages. Now they can specialize in making one good and a whole supply chain to build around it. You have 70, 80 years old women become entrepreneur, selling things on the internet, and that's possible because Alibaba created this infrastructure.
This is such a great point.
In other cases, it could be physical infrastructures. There's no way that the rural farmers could make their produce in a more productive way because there's no infrastructure to bring them out. And so creating infrastructure could be an important part. Of course, the infrastructure needs to be governed by transparent rules and regulations, but maybe that could be something that I would add to your list as well, especially in the context of emerging developing economy or war-torn economy where there is no infrastructure.
Right, and great. Okay, Urko?
Well, to me, the answer to the question is not any of the above, but I actually have an issue with the way you asked the question.
Okay, and nobody likes my question. It's good. I'm very happy. I'm learning. Glad to learn.
And the reason for that is that, two things. One is that there's behind your question, there's this implicit assumption that we have market failures and we have structural failures and we have a government who can address those failures in a top-down mode. Now, if you want to facilitate entrepreneurial ecosystems, they're just too complex for the identification. is the question of money or is it a question of this or that? Obviously, all of these aspects are important. And you might have bottlenecks that constrain the performance of ecosystems. But this top-down approach, I would question whether that really is applicable when you try to foster an ecosystem that both affects who decides to become an entrepreneur. I think selection is a huge issue, as you know, Sami and others have pointed out there. Who chooses to become an entrepreneur is just crucial here. The system, the quality of the system influences the trade-offs that individuals perceive. And, you know, we want the talented individuals to become entrepreneurs. So the role of government, as I see it, is more of an ecosystem facilitator. And because these ecosystems are made of codependent, yet hierarchically independent stakeholders. We have business angels, we have prospective entrepreneurs, we have government agencies, we have established businesses. Command and control and top-down mode doesn't necessarily work. So you need to think about alternatives, and you need to think about ecosystem facilitation approaches where you engage the stakeholders. Because from outside, it's very difficult to understand how different ecosystems work. You need to engage the stakeholders because the information lies within the system, and you try to access it. And somehow it's this facilitating role that I see as important, as opposed to this, you know, market failure. There's a market failure there, let's throw money at it, it's fixed. Or there's a structural failure there, let's build walls, it's fixed.
Yeah.